Okay, today we're going to learn Eruvin Daf Ayin Hey. Today's Daf is dedicated by Rabbi Rebecca Einstein Shor in honor of the first yurtzeit of her grandfather, Dov ben Yitzchak Yaakov Alevi and Rezel, Zichrono Levracha. He would be thrilled to know that his death inspired me to take on the commitment to Daf Yomi. And by Sarah Borelowitz, a memory of her father, Tzvi ben Moshe Zichrono Levracha, in his 12th yurtzeit. He always had a Cincino Gemara with him until the Steinsaltz came out. If anyone remembers those Cincino Gemaras. Okay, we're going to start today's daf. I'm warning you, when we get to the next Mishnah, it's going to be a complicated daf, okay? Preparation. I know the last number of dafim have been not so simple. I want to just remind you, and I'll remind you during class, that sometimes you go through a slew of complicated dafim and a little bit out there. First of all, on every daf, you can find something interesting, something like a take home with you. And today I'll try to point those out in particular, specifically because the daf is so complicated. I often point them out, but I'll point them out even more so that you feel like, oh, wow, there's something here, which is amazing. And I try to organize as best as possible. I'm going to use charts. In fact, I'm going to use the share screen to kind of also show the sheet that I use, part of the sheet anyway, to be able to visualize it better. I made some diagrams so that you can visualize what's going on. The first part's not as complicated, but when we get to the Mishnah, you'll see it gets a little bit complicated. So we're going to start from Ayin Daled Amud Bet. We ended with this issue of Rav Yehuda said the name of Rav about a mavoi that has on one side an Ovei Kochavim, on the other side a Yisrael. And if you remember, that house that faced the courtyard or the alley basically has two houses behind it that face the street on the other end. So at this point, they back on those houses, and we have an issue because comes Rav, and he says you can't make an eruv between those houses through the windows, right? And we said maybe windows, maybe even doors, maybe not. Maybe the whole idea is it's not so accessible, right? And windows are much less accessible to get through. This will be a lead into the windows we're going to see on the daf on Shabbat. Where do we start with windows between courtyards and between houses, etc. But in any case, whether you say it's only windows or even doors, it's clearly somehow less accessible for them to get to the alley. And therefore, Rav says it's as if there's one person living here. And we don't want him to make an eruv with those people. If we allow him to make an eruv with those other Jews living there, he'll end up, as we saw, we'll see this inside, but the Rav's reasoning is we don't want one individual hanging out in a courtyard where the only other individual is a non-Jew. This is different than the other non-Jew issue where we said, oh, one person, it's unlikely they're going to live with a non-Jew. That's something different. It's the same principle that we don't want him consorting with these Gentiles because they were known, again, the Gentiles in those days were known to be difficult, people that had no moral values or anything. So now, what did we say? Abaye asked Rav Yosef, is it only when it opens to a mavoi, and is that the issue, or is it even a chatzir? So Rav Yosef said it's even opening up into a courtyard, not just an alley. So Rav Yosef said, though, but why did you even think to distinguish? And as Rav Yosef couldn't understand why he was distinguishing, this is important for the story later. So Abaye said, it's because I thought that maybe the issue is that we say, adirat nochuri lo shma dira. The fact that there's a Gentile living here, it's not considered a house. If it's not considered a house, well, then it's not a courtyard. If it's not a courtyard, then we don't have a case of courtyards opening up into the alley. It's only really one courtyard of the Jew. And maybe that's why you can't fix this mavoi with the classic way you would fix a mavoi. So now Abaye just continues to say, if it's because of ein mavoi nitar lechi v'korah, and Rav already, unless you have batim and chatzerot open to it, houses and courtyards, then why would Rav need to say that and need to say this statement? You'd have to say, it's not clear why you would need to say both. Tarte lamali. So starting from the last line in Ayin Daled Amud Bet, why would you need both then? According to Abaye, this is all the hypothetical suggestion that Abaye had. He said you would need both. Tzricha. Di'imeahi hava mina dirat ovei kochavim shma dira. If you only had ein mavoi nitar b'lechi v'korah, unless there's batim and chatzerot ptuchim, right? That in order to fix it with, in order to count this as an alley that can be fixed with a beam or a post or a cross beam, if you only had that, you would think, you wouldn't know the halacha that a house of an Ovei Kochavim is not considered a house. Okay, notice the word Ovei Kochavim here, they use interchangeably, Ovei Kochavim, Nochri, Goy, these all switch around, even different versions sometimes have different words. So according to this, it's to teach you, Rav taught this particular case to teach you that halacha, that we don't view a house of a Gentile as a house. Okay, it's as if there's no house there. That's what he wanted to teach you. And therefore, kamash malan dirat ovei kochavim lo shma dira. That's what he wanted to teach you, so you don't think it is. V'imehacha, what if then you just had this case with the nochri, and then you would know with the Gentile, then you'd know two things. You'd know it doesn't count as a dira, and you would know that because it doesn't count as a dira, you now don't have courtyards and houses, and therefore you can't fix the mavoi. So then Rav wouldn't have needed to make the statement, Ein mavoi nitar belechi v'koah. It's a bit of a strange suggestion because that's the basic halacha. This is just a case. So you would think Rav would say it anyway, but anyway, they're going to say, you might not have known how many houses. It would teach you courtyards, but it wouldn't teach you how many houses in the courtyards. So kamash malam batim train. That's why Rav said his line about the batim and chatzerot. It says batim means plural, two houses. So from there we learn how many houses, and that's why he would need to say both. But now going back, this was only a biased suggestion that maybe it wouldn't apply to a chatzer. Now we go back and we say, well, hashta de amarav afilu chatzer. So now that Rav said it applies not only in a mavoi, it has nothing to do with a mavoi nitar belechi v'korah ad sheyesh batim and chatzerot. Tama de Rav, now we have to explain what's the reason. If Rav, I brought this up at the end of yesterday's daf. De kasavar asur lasot yachid bimkom ovei kochavim. And as I reminded you today, we don't want to make a situation where there's one individual living with a Gentile. We think that that's not going to be a good influence on him, and we want to avoid that situation. Here comes the first gem of today's daf. Amar Rav Yosef. Rav Yosef now ends the conversation with Abai and says, Ihachi, once you raised your question now, as we say in Hebrew, nafala simon, which means, now I get it. I've been hearing this thing all my life and I never understood it. This is what it means when Rabbi Tavla kept saying, Ovei kochavim trei zimne. He said Ovei kochavim in context with this case twice. V'lo yadana, my amar, I didn't know why he had to repeat himself. Now I understand the fact that you asked, is this just in a mavoi or is it also in a chatzer? Now, Rav Yosef knew the answer, it was in both, but he kind of viewed them both as one. Now, because of Abai's question, what's great about this, right? The more questions the student asks, the more it makes the teacher understand things better. And therefore, the teacher says, thank you for asking me that question because now I understand you said it twice to say once for the chatzer, once for the mavoi, so you know that it applies to both. So now, okay, that was the first nice one. Now we're getting to the complicated part. Mishnah. Shtei chatzerot zo lifnim mizo. Okay, I'm going to pull up the sheet now, and I'm going to show you. The way I organized it on the sheet is by number of case numbers. That will help you organize. Okay. And we're going to basically say, and first of all, what's good about this is we mentioned this previously. Today, we're going to learn it straight on, but some of the concepts should be familiar. We have an inner courtyard and an outer courtyard. The inner courtyard has what we call drisat regel in the outer. That means the inner, when they go to leave the mavoi, because they're in the inner courtyard, they have to go through the outer courtyard. So that means that they have drisat regel. So let's say they do their own eruv, right? Or let's say the outer courtyard has their own eruv, not with the inner courtyard, because the inner courtyard can walk through, that gives them rights to that courtyard. And they're basically like members of the courtyard and they're going to forbid the others from carrying. The question is, in which cases? It's not so clear in every case. And we're going to see a variety of opinions about this. So you have two courtyards, one in, one out. Now we're going to have all different possibilities. That's why I split the chart in two. Did they make an eruv or not? The pnimi and the chitzoni. Who made an eruv? Who didn't make an eruv? And what's the law? And the law is going to be different for the ones living on the inside and the ones living on the outside. Just to give you also, I made diagrams at the bottom, green and red. Green is full and red is empty to also make it obvious. Green means we did an eruv, right? Green like a traffic light. Red means they didn't do an eruv, and the circle is the inner and the rectangle is the outer. Okay, I thought it was a better way of seeing it, like a circle going into a square. So the inner versus the outer. So we're going to see all these cases going forward. We're going to start from the first case. Irva pnimit velo irva chitzona. If the inner one made their own eruv, but the outer one did not, hapnimit muteret. The inner ones are allowed to carry within their inner courtyard. Vachitzona asura, but the outer ones can't. Okay, because, right, presumably, because the inner ones have drisat regel. Now remember, the outer ones don't walk ever into the inner courtyard because they have no reason to go in there. So they don't forbid the inner ones, but the inner ones forbid the outer ones. Hachitzona velo pnimit. What if the outer ones did an eruv, but not the inner ones? Shtehen asurot. Everyone's forbidden again because the inner one has what we call drisat regel. They can walk through the outer one. So even though the outer ones did an eruv, it's not going to work. What if irva zolatzma v'zolatzma? Each one made their own eruv. Zo muteret b'fnei atzma v'zo muteret b'fnei atzma. Each one made an eruv in their own space, so each one is allowed in their own space. Rabbi Akiva oser hachitzona. Okay, Rabbi Akiva forbids the outer one, so now we have a machloket. According to Tanakama, okay, and I'm going to already tell you this, I put this in the chart in a particular way, which is not necessarily the way we're going to see this at the end. This is the way we understand it right now. It's a machloket between the rabbis and Rabbi Akiva. The rabbis say each one is allowed, okay, and Rabbi Akiva oser hachitzona. He says, even if the outer ones made an eruv and the inner ones made their own eruv, because they didn't make one eruv together and the inner ones can go through the outer ones, right? He says the chitzona is forbidden. Why? Shedrisat regel, hadrisat haregel osarta. Drisat regel forbids no matter what, okay? It always forbids. We're going to see Rabbi Akiva has an extreme position. It's going to always forbid. Every case is going to be a problem here. As long as the outer doesn't make an eruv with the inner, right? The inner is going to forbid the outer. The Chachamim omrim ein drisat haregel osarta. This is the line that's going to cause us problems. Chachamim say drisat regel doesn't forbid. Now we're going to understand this later to mean it's okay. So I put it here in the chart as if it's explaining the first opinion, right? What did they say? If you make each one makes their own eruv, Chachamim say zo muter b'fnei atzma v'zo muter b'fnei atzma. They can each walk in their own space because the drisat regel of the inner ones don't forbid the outer ones. Now, what case is this? This is what we call regel hamuteret bimkoma. The pnimi is allowed in its space. Therefore, it doesn't forbid in another space. That's going to be their theory, that if you can carry in your own space, then you're not going to forbid somewhere else. But the line, that's not exactly what Chachamim say in the Mishnah. It sounds like Chachamim are saying in the Mishnah, ein drisat regel osarta ever. Even if the pnimi can't carry, they don't forbid the outer ones, which would go against, by the way, right? Case number two. Case number two is the pnimi didn't make an eruv and the outer ones made an eruv. And what did we say? The pnimi forbids, right? This would say the pnimi never forbids. So we're going to have two ways to understand this line, and this line is going to cause us a lot of issues. If you didn't get it all, don't worry. We're going to go through the cases over and over until we get everything. Let's say each one made their own eruv, but in one of the eruvs, somebody forgot. We're now up to case number 4. Okay, now it depends on who. Hapnimit muteret. Sorry, if so if it's the outer one who forgets, so apnimit muteret. Remember, this is like before. If the pnimit is good, then they can carry within their own space because nobody from the outside is walking in. But the chitzona is asura, clearly because they made an eruv and they messed it up because someone didn't join. Min apnimit velo irev. What if it's the reverse? Someone in the inner courtyard forgot. Well, then obviously we're going to go back to our case. It's like the pnimi doesn't have an eruv, and shtehen asurot. Everyone's going to be forbidden. Natnu eruvam b'makom achad. What if they all did an eruv together? Let's just assume to make it simple, there's 2 people in the inner, 2 people in the outer. They all do one eruv together. That until now we've been talking about separate eruvs for each section. V'shachach echad. But one person forgot. Now at this point, it really doesn't matter who forgot. Bein min hapnimit. One person from any of the 4 forgot. Everyone's going to be forbidden because now they don't have some, right? They're not all together. But if one person lived in the inner and one person lived in the outer, they don't even need an eruv. And this matches case number 3. It's as if they each did their own eruv and then, right, each one is allowed in their own space. It's not a problem. So now we start with the big line that's going to create a lot of issues. Ki'ata Rav Dimi Amar Rabbi Yana. I just want to again refresh your memory that we have this concept. Okay, we're going to go over these again. And if you look at the bottom of this chart that I have up on the screen, Rabbi Akiva says regel hamuteret bimkoma oseret shelo bimkoma. Even if the pnimi is allowed, and obviously if they're not allowed, if they don't have an eruv, they forbid even in lo bimkoma. That's in the outer courtyard. Okay, so they say if you're allowed here or if you're forbidden here, it doesn't matter. No matter what you're going to forbid, they're going to forbid every case. That's what you see in this chart here. Rabbi Akiva forbids every case that we're going to see. The rabbis have one of 2 possibilities what they hold. Either they say, regel hamuteret bimkoma, if the pnimi is allowed, when they say ein drisat regel osarta, what do they mean? Do they mean in any case? Or do they mean only in the case where the inner people did their own Eruv and they're good? If they're good, then they're not Oser anywhere else. But what if they can't carry? Maybe then they forbid other people. So that's the debate here. Is regel hamuteret bimkoma ena oseret shelo bimkoma? But if it's asur bimkoma, it is going to forbid in the outer. Or do we say, and this is what Rabbi Yana is going to say, okay, we're going to see this. I'll read it inside right now. Ki ata Rav Dimi amar Rabbi Yana, zo divrei Rabbi Akiva. What we've seen in our Mishnah, most of these cases, they're all Rabbi Akiva. De'amar afilu regel hamuteret bimkoma oseret shelo bimkoma. In other words, right, if the regel allows in one place, it's going to forbid somewhere else. If it's permitted where they are, but aval chachamim omrim, but the rabbis hold, keshem sheregel hamuteret ena oseret, kach regel hasura ena oseret. Just like we said that Rabbi Akiva has an extreme position, everything's forbidden. He claims that the rabbis, this is Rav Dimi in the name of Rabbi Yanai. Remember, Rav Dimi was one of the people that brought the Torah from Israel to Bavel. So he's bringing the Torah of Rabbi Yanai to Bavel. And he says, this is what Rabbi Yanai said. He said that according to Chachamim, you see in the chart, everything is allowed. Meaning, it doesn't matter if the Pnimi, look at these cases, did an Eruv, didn't do an Eruv. It doesn't make a difference. Even if they're forbidden in their space, if the Chitzoni has their own Eruv, the Pnimi can't mess them up. Because he thinks, and that goes back to that line in the Mishnah, Ein drisat haregel osarta ever. Okay, it didn't say there, Ein drisat regel osarta in a place where they're permitted. No, it seemed to say across the board, whether the Pnimi is allowed, whether they're not allowed, no matter what, it's going to be forbidden. Okay, so that's going to be the issue here. So now case number 4 has no Eruv at all. Yeah, that's when neither does an Eruv, right? This is Erva la'atzma and Erva, wait, so I did say, right, maybe it's not case number 4 then. Case number 4 is, right, okay. So maybe I did this picture wrong. Maybe it's not case number 4. That's just if nobody does an Eruv, okay? If nobody does an Eruv, then obviously it's not allowed, I guess. Why did I put that there? Maybe I'm trying to remember. I think I was just trying to show the extreme cases. Maybe it's not actually a case number 4. Okay, in any case, it's at least less significant point. So let's keep on target. So Rav Dimi says that this is Chachamim. He has this opinion. So now we're going to start with Tanan. Okay, I'm just going to point out, if you're writing in the chat today, it's going to be hard for me while I'm following along here. So I might just answer questions at the end. Tanan. So the first question is from the Mishnah, from the second line in the Mishnah. Okay, case number 2. What's case number 2? You can look at it on either chart. Okay, case number 2 is Irva chitzona velo pnimit. Let's say the outer one has an Eruv, okay, but the inner one didn't do an Eruv. Shtehen asurot. What did we say? They're both forbidden. So now, whose opinion does this match? Mane. Ilema Rabbi Akiva, my area regel hasura, afilu regel muter. Now this does match Rabbi Akiva, because Rabbi Akiva says, no matter what, it's going to be forbidden, and this says it's forbidden. However, it wouldn't make sense that he would bring a case where the Chitzoni has an Eruv, because, I'm sorry, why where the Pnimi didn't make an Eruv, my area regel asura, if even Rabbi Akiva holds that even if the Pnimi made an Eruv, the inner Korea made an Eruv, they're still going to forbid the other case. So why would he bring up this case when he should have brought up the case at the bottom here, case number 3, where both made an Eruv, right? If he holds both made an Eruv, it still is forbidden. That would have been a much bigger chidush, as we say, right? A novel thing to say. If just the Pnimi didn't make an Eruv and they forbid, well, that's not as big a chidush. So it doesn't make sense that Rabbi Akiva would bring that case, because why would he bring that case and not the case number 3? Elalav Rabbanan, so it must be the rabbis, which now we're going to say, according to this, what do the rabbis hold? Okay, let's go back to case number 2. If the inner one didn't make an Eruv and the outer one made an Eruv, then the law is that everyone's forbidden. We just said, according to Rabbi Yanai, that according to the rabbis, everything is permitted, right? If the Chitzoni has an Eruv, they're fine. They can carry. Drisat HaRegel doesn't mess them up, and this says it does. So that's a question of Rabbi Yanai. So how do they answer this question? They say, La'olam Rabbi Akiva. It really is Rabbi Akiva. V'lo zo av zo katani. It's a structure of not only this case, but even this case. In other words, they bring the less novel halacha first, and then they bring the more novel. And that's why the order is 2 and then 3. 2 is the less novel approach, right? Because that case, the chitzoni the pnimi didn't have an eruv, of course they're going to forbid. But not only that, even in the case where the more novel approach, where the inner one has an eruv and the outer one has an eruv, that's the next case. Irva latzma. What did Rabbi Akiva say? It's forbidden because of drisat regel. So it's the structure of lo zo af zo. Not only this, but even this. And then we resolve. We're going to have some other issues, which is Tnan, irva zo latzma. Well, now let's look at case number 3 itself. Vizo latzma. If each one made their own eruv, zo muteret b'fnei atzma, v'zo muteret b'fnei atzma. Now, why are they allowed according to the rabbis? First of all, so far this matches the rabbis because the rabbis permit every case. But remember, in the Mishnah, okay, and you see this here, there's a machloket. The rabbis say each is allowed, and Rabbi Akiva says the chitzonah is not permitted. Only the inner one can. But the chitzonah is not because of drisat regel. So what's implied from this case? Tama di irva. The whole reason it works is because they each made an eruv. But ha lo irva. But what if the pnimi didn't make an eruv? What would be the obvious? Shtehen asuot. They would both be forbidden. Now, that's case number 2, basically. But we just said case number 2 is only Rabbi Akiva. Right now, we're going to say that the fact that the rabbis say you can carry if each made an eruv seems to imply that if the inner one made an eruv, you wouldn't be able to carry. And that, which is case 2, but we said case 2 isn't the rabbis because it doesn't match the way Rabbi Yana understands the rabbis. Now we're going to say this basic case and the inference from it, which implies case number 2, would be saying, Hi Tana da'ama regel muteret eno oseret, regel asura oseret. Here you see that there is an opinion, because if you say inference from case number 3 is case number 2. Remember, a minute ago we said case number 2 is Rabbi Akiva. It doesn't connect. But they're basically saying that case number 2 is inferred from case number 3, from the rabbi's opinion of case number 3. So to say it's Rabbi Akiva doesn't make sense now. And to say basically that the inference from this case is, it depends whether the pnimi did an eruv or not. That's going to mean that we distinguish between regel hamuteret and regel haoseret. And we just said that nobody holds that because we said Rabbi Akiva as an extreme, everything's forbidden, even if it's regel hamuteret, meaning the pnimi did an eruv. And Chachamim are going to say everything's forbidden, even if, right? I'm sorry, I said it wrong, right? Everything is permitted. I hope I said it right with Rabbi Akiva. According to Rabbi Akiva, everything's forbidden, even if it's regel hamuteret. And according to the rabbis, everything's permitted, even if the pnimi didn't do an eruv. So this inference from this line of the Mishnah doesn't match any opinion. So we're going to read that inside now. Mane, ilema Rabbi Akiva, he afilu regel hamuteret nami. And right, if it's Rabbi Akiva would hold, even if the pnimi did an eruv, they're not allowed. And that says it in the Mishnah explicitly, that you can't, right? That's the case. Rabbi Akiva forbids this case. And elalav Rabbanan he, so it must be Rabbanan. And again, that means that Rabbanan is a middle position and not an extreme position like Rabbi Yana, I said. So not only that, they're going to say va'od mi desefa Rabbi Akiva reish alav Rabbi Akiva. And not only that, but it's obvious that that's the shita of Chachamim because Rabbi Akiva disagrees about case number 3. Says it explicitly. This is the rabbi's opinion. This is Rabbi Akiva's opinion. So therefore, how can you explain this? So the only way they can explain this according to Rabbi Yana is to have a rereading of case number 3. Kula Rabbi Akiva hi v'chisure machasre v'hachi katani. It must be missing words here, and this must be all Rabbi Akiva's approach. So here is how it reads. Irva zo latzma. Again, we're rereading just case number 3. Irva zo latzma v'zo latzma. If each one did their own eruv, zo muteret b'fnei atzma v'zo muteret b'fnei atzma. Each is allowed in their own courtyard. But b'ameh dvarim amurim, how could Rabbi Akiva ever allow this? We already said Rabbi Akiva doesn't allow anything. Shasta daka. Do you remember we learned this? If you put up a little something in between the inner and the outer, then we'll allow you to carry in each one, because then we make a clear separation between them and we say, we're not passing through on Shabbat. We're separate. Then it works, which wasn't what we were talking about at all, right? That's an exception to the rule. Aval, lo asta daka chitzona surah divrei Rabbi Akiva. And this is all Rabbi Akiva's approach. Because if you don't do a dakah, then even the outer one will be forbidden. And why is that? She Rabbi Akiva. Now it's a lead-in to where it says Rabbi Akiva osera chitzona. We're basically saying, oh, this is a lead-in to explain why Rabbi Akiva said what he said here. That only with a dakah it will work, but without a dakah it's not going to work. Because Rabbi Akiva osera chitzona mipnei shedrisat regel oseret. And Chachamim Omrim, they would disagree with this whole section because they say ein drisat regel oseret. And again, now we can explain They say Ein Drisat HaRegel Oseret ever, and their opinion just isn't mentioned here, right? They mention it in a line, but the opinion here, so again, because I made a chart, it's complicated because the chart shows there's a Machlokes Chachamim Rabbi Akiva. Now, basically, if I had the opportunity, I would just erase this whole section of Chachamim Omrim, and I would place instead, this is all Rabbi Akiva, and it's only with a dakah that it would work. Okay, so now we have a whole different way of reading the Mishnah. But we're still not satisfied with this. We're still going to have a number of problems. Okay, starting from Mativ Rav Baby Bar Abaye. Okay, we're about 10 or 12 lines from the bottom. V'im hayu shel yichidim. Okay, let's skip to case number 7. What if there were only individuals living there? What did we say? Ein tzrichin la'arev. So now, what's inferred from here? Ha shel rabim tzrichin la'arev. But if there were many people living there, right, more than one, you would need an eruv. Alma, what do you see here? Regel hamuteret b'mkoma eina oseret. But regel hasura oseret. This exactly proves the point that it depends. If the pnimi is allowed because they're only one, then they don't forbid the chitzoni. But if they're two and they're forbidden, they mess up the chitzoni. So that's exactly the middle position, which we just said nobody holds, according to Rabbi Yanai. Ve'od, and furthermore, Mativ Ravina, he questions from case number 5. Okay, we're going to read case 4 and 5, but it's really number 5 that's the issue. Remember, this is when each one does their own Eruv, but one of the Eruvs is messed up because one of the people forgot to join the Eruv. And it depended whether it was the outer one who forgot or the inner one who forgot. Again, they're doing 2 separate Eruvs here. If the outer one forgot, this is case 4, this isn't so important right now, then the inner one will be allowed because the inner one has a good Eruv, but the outer one will be forbidden because they don't have an Eruv. That's very obvious. That doesn't have to do with regel ha-muteret or regel ha-oseret because the outer one's forbidden because they don't have their own Eruv. But what if the outer one has an Eruv and one of the pnimi forgets and doesn't make an Eruv? Now you can guess where this is going. The chitzoni again has a great Eruv. The pnimi doesn't. If you say Drisat HaRegel never forbids, like Rabbi Yanai said, the Chachamim say, then the chitzoni should be allowed. And what does it say here? Shtehen asurot. It's not allowed. So again, you have a problem, right? So first they say like this, Tama de shachach. The whole reason why it's a problem is because the inner one forgot to make an Eruv. But it seems to imply, Halo shachach shtehem mutarot. But if the inner one made an Eruv, it sounds like it depends whether the inner one has an Eruv or doesn't have an Eruv. Depends, right? It will, Drisat Regel will be forbidden only if the pnimi is forbidden. But if the pnimi is good, that's Regel hamuteret and oseret. But Chachamim said, no matter what it doesn't forbid, and that obviously doesn't match. So Alma, therefore they conclude, it can't possibly be what Rabbi Yanai says, Regel hamuteret ein oseret and Regel hasura oseret, right? It has to be that if they're allowed, then they don't forbid. But if they're not permitted, they don't have an Eruv, they forbid. So basically we're stuck. We don't understand Rabbi Yanai. So what's our solution? Well, luckily, what did I tell you from the beginning? Somebody came and brought the Torah of Eretz Yisrael. Rav Dimi came and brought Rabbi Yanai's opinion. But now we have another person who came and brought Rabbi Yanai's opinion and changed it a little bit. Okay, he said, oh no, there must have been a misunderstanding of Rav Dimi, and he has a different explanation, which makes everything make, I should say, perfect sense. Okay, we'll have to go back and re-explain. Ki ata Ravin Amar Rabbi Yanai. Shalosh machlokot b'davar. There's 3 opinions. Okay, we thought all until now there were 2 opinions. We kept saying Chachamim and Rabbi Akiva, right? Rabbi Akiva comes in where he says, oh no, still it's going to be forbidden because Regel hamuteret still forbids, right? He thinks everything is forbidden. So we have Tanakama, Savar, and now we're going to go back. All the times we kept saying, it sounds like Tanakama is really saying it depends if the pnimi made an Eruv or didn't make an Eruv. So Regel hamuteret eina oseret, but regel ha'asura oseret. We're now going to say, and we're going to go back, forget what I said before, or how we tried to explain, that whole 3rd case was Rabbi Akiva. And we tried to explain the 2nd case was Rabbi Akiva. No, it's not. That's actually the Chachamim's opinion, as we had the chart earlier. Good, I didn't erase the chart, because the chart now holds. But I have to change one thing about this chart, and I'll explain it in a minute. So, originally, we thought the rabbis disagreed with Rabbi Akiva, and the 2nd case of the Pnimi didn't do an Eruv, and the Chitzonah did do an Eruv. They're all forbidden. We thought that was Rabbi Akiva. That is Rabbi Akiva. And I'm sorry, we thought it was Chachamim. That is Chachamim. So Chachamim basically hold, if the Pnimi didn't do an Eruv, it's going to mess up the outer courtyard. If the Pnimi did do an Eruv, everything's good. That's case number 3. Pnimi is good. They don't mess up the Chitzoni. All is good. That's Tanakama. Then Rabbi Akiva, so he's going to be the same. He doesn't change. Savar afilu regel hamuteret oseret. Then there's Rabbanan Batrai. Now, this line that I put, remember I told you, basically the way, and again, you don't see this in the chart, but the Mishnah read, this one made an Eruv, that one made an Eruv. Case number 3, Chachamim say, Zo muter b'fnatzma, v'zo muter b'fnatzma. Rabbi Akiva, oser achitzona, shedrisat regel osarta. Then we had that line that I specifically pointed out to you to really pay attention to. Then it says, V'chachamim say, ein drisat haregel osarta, period. That's where Rabbi Yana came along and said, they must say never because of that line. What we're going to learn now is that line is not explaining the Shita of Chachamim that was brought previously. That's a third opinion. That one line is Rabbanan Batrai. They hold, Kashem sheregel muteret ein oseret, kach regel asura ein oseret. And the Mishnah adds that line to say, by the way, there's a third opinion here. And there's someone who holds by all 3. So now look back at the chart. Okay, the chart I made with the circles and the square and the rectangles. So Rabbi Akiva is going to forbid in all cases because he holds, this is just a summary, right? Whether the inner did an Eruv, whether they didn't, it doesn't matter. They forbid no matter what the outer courtyard because they can walk through the outer courtyard. And even if they both did their own Eruv, still it's a problem. Then we have the Chachamim who, the way we thought Rabbi Yanai said, according to Rav Dimi, who in the end becomes, I probably should have written this in the chart, but it's also the Chachamim Batra, according to Ravin, who say everything is allowed. It doesn't matter. The Pnimi never forbid the Chitzoni because so what that they can walk through that? Okay, and now I didn't really explain this, but what's the issue? Just because they walk through doesn't mean they have rights to hang out in that courtyard. It's not their courtyard. Yes, they pass through, but they're just passing through. That doesn't mess anybody up. So they don't mess them up ever. And then we have the rabbis who are mentioned all over the Mishnah, all the other opinions that don't appear in the name of Rabbi Akiva. That's the rabbis, according to Rabbi Yana, according to Ravin, who basically say it depends. If the Pnimi made an Eruv, then they don't forbid the outer ones. In other words, if they're allowed in their space and the outer ones did an Eruv also, then they're going to be permitted. One second, did I do something wrong here? Pnimit Irva, oh, sorry. Right, I did something wrong here. I have to fix this. This is Oseret, right? So this is, it's good, I could do this at the time. So this would be forbidden and case number 2 would be permitted. Am I doing this right? Right? No, maybe I'm wrong. Okay, one second. I thought I had this all. Maybe I did it right. One second. Let me think about it. If the case number 1 is irva pnimit, lo irva chitzona, right. Right. If they're muteret, they don't forbid from drisat regel. In this case, actually, the chitzoni will be forbidden, but not because the pnimi is forbidding it. That's why I wrote it like that. In other words, when the outer one has an eruv and the inner one doesn't, then they're going to forbid because of drisat regel. Okay. When they, sorry, I can't remember now what I said, but if they have an eruv and they're good, then they don't forbid anyone else, okay? Not because of drisat regel. It could be the chitzonah is forbidden because they don't have an eruv, like in that case. But theoretically, they wouldn't forbid because that's a case of regel hamuteret. Regel hamuteret is ena oseret, okay? Only regel haoseret is oseret, okay? So that's the way we understand the rabbis have a middle position, and it's only these Rabbanan Batra that were mentioned in that one line that have an extreme position. So Rabbi Akiva has an extreme position, and the Rabbanan Batra have an extreme opinion, and that re-explains everything in the Mishnah. Okay, that was the complicated part of today. Now we're going to move on, a little bit simpler. Natnu Eruvan. Okay, now we're going back to one of the cases. Natnu Eruvan b'makom echad. What if they put their eruv all in one place? Meaning, all 4 of them, this was case number 6. They all did an eruv together, all 4 of them. B'shachach echad, but one of them forgot. It doesn't matter whether it was the pimi or the chitzoni, they're all going to be forbidden. My makom echad, where exactly is this eruv going to be? So now they say, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, chitzona, umay karu la makom echad, makom hamiyuchad l'shtehen. Has to be in the outer one, and why do we call it chitzona? Or the case is describing if it were in the outer one. It's not that it has to be, but the case is describing if it were in the outer courtyard. Why is it called echad? One, right? One you might have thought could mean anyone. One means miyuchad, the special one. Why is it special, the outer one? Because both walk through there, right? It doesn't make sense to put it, as if you put it in the Pnimi, the laws would be different, and we're going to see that, okay? But this rule that if, again, what did it say in the Mishnah? If one of them forgot, it doesn't matter who, they're both going to be forbidden. That's only if you put it in Makom Echad, which is if it was in the outer courtyard. And now we're going to see this from a Braita, and this we learned also in the past. Tanya Namihachi, Natnu Eruvam Bachitzona, if they put their Eruv in the outside, Vishachach Echad, but one of the four people forgot. That's exactly what we just described. Bein min hachitzona ubein min hapnimit v'lo irev, right? If one of them forgot, it doesn't matter who, shtehan asura. That already was our proof. But we're already in this Braita. We're going to see different cases now. Natnu eruvam b'pnimit. What if their eruv was in the inner courtyard? V'shachach echad min hapnimit. And who forgot? One of the pnimit. So we had it in our inner courtyard, and one of us forgot to put our eruv in, but all the outer courtyard people did also, brought their stuff. V'lo irev shtehan asurot. Obviously, also everyone's going to be forbidden. But min hachitzona v'lo irev. But let's say here there's going to be a distinction. Who forgot? If we had, you and me were living in the inner courtyard, and there were some people living in the outer courtyard, and we did our eruv, but they forgot. Okay, now again, we were trying to do an eruv, all four of us. I wasn't trying to do an eruv just for the inner courtyard. We were doing an eruv, so this should be a classic case of it messes everybody up, just like in the others. But now they're going to say, according to Rabbi Akiva, shtehan asurot. If Rabbi Akiva matches Rabbi Akiva, who seems to be, always saying they're all forbidden. But Chachamim omrim, bizo, in this unique case, pnimit muteret v'chitzona asura. Here we're going to allow the pnimi, since the eruv is sitting in their possession, we're going to allow them, as we've seen before, to close the door. Remember this? And they said, listen, we've got an eruv. We all joined the eruv. You didn't. Well, we're not letting you mess us up. Okay? So we're going to have a question on this. Amalei Rabba bar Chanan l'Abaye. Ma'ishna l'Rabbanan da'amre pnimit muteret. Why did the rabbis, we have a machloket, the rabbis and Rabbi Akiva. So what's the logic of the rabbis? Mishum da'achta dashu mishtamsha. The pnimi can close the door and say, don't come in our property, which they can do because the pnimi, the chitzoni, has no drisat regel, as we say. They don't walk ever through there. So they could say, we're shutting the door and leaving you out. So the Rabbi Akiva nami, techadashu v'tishamish. So wouldn't we say the same thing? Why wouldn't Rabbi Akiva agree? Amar le, eruv margila. What does he say? The eruv, because there's an eruv and the eruv was supposed to be with all of them, it's going to mess people up. Okay, it's going to confuse people. They'll think there's an eruv and that it's okay. So the Rabbanan nami eruv margila. Why don't the rabbis say the same thing, that they eruv margila? So they say, and this is another. Here's our second gem of today's daf. They can say to the outer people, listen, we're putting the eruv in our courtyard. We wanted to make an eruv. We're letting you join our eruv, but we're doing it for you to fix things, to make it better for us. We didn't ask you to join to make it worse for us. So if you can say to someone, and this comes up in a number of cases, and it's very interesting when it's used, basically says, by us joining you, right, by you joining us, you were only adding to what we had. You were trying to make it better for us. If we didn't have you, we'd have an eruv and we'd be able to carry in our inner courtyard. What you were doing by joining was allowing us to also carry in your courtyard. But now that you've messed us up, you're not going to mess us up worse than if we didn't have you in the first place. So thanks, but no thanks, and we can ignore you. Okay, that's the rabbi's approach. So now, obviously, we're going to ask, according to Rabbi Akiva, why doesn't Rabbi Akiva hold this? The Rabbi Akiva nami tema l'tikune shitaftich v'lo lavute. So Rabbi Akiva is going to say, well, it depends on the situation. If they really, really mess them up entirely, then we would say this. But they don't mess them up entirely because there's an alternate solution. In other words, he's saying we don't go resort to this claim unless we have no choice. But in this case, we have a choice. What's the choice? The outer ones can just say, we're going to relinquish our rights to you. We're back to relinquishing of rights. Since one of them didn't join, they can just say, oh, we relinquish our rights to you. So there's a better solution than basically saying we're cutting you off of the eruv. So Rabbanan, why don't they say this, right? We're doing the ping pong. Every time we come up with a good answer for someone, why didn't the other one agree? Remember, we're talking about courtyards. Remember the Machloket Shmuel Rabbi Yochanan? Can you do bitul reshut between courtyards? Rabbi Yochanan said yes. Shmuel said no. We're talking about courtyards here. There is no option to do bitul reshut according to the rabbis. According to Rabbi Akiva, he thinks you can, and that's why he'd rather use that than bitul reshut. So now they're going to say, well, if that's the case, then basically what you're saying is, Lema Shmuel Rabbi Yochanan, but plukta Rabbanan Rabbi Akiva kamiflige. Then you're basically saying the machloket rabbis and Rabbi Akiva here, we got pushed into a corner to basically say their whole machloket is, can you do bitul reshut from one chatzer to the other? If you could do bitul reshut, then we don't rely on litikune, right? You have to actually do bitul reshut. According to the rabbis, you can't do bitul reshut. Since you can't, we allow you to basically just close the door and say, you're out of here. So if that's the case, when we learned the machloket Shmuel and Rabbi Yochanan, we should have said, this is based on the machloket Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis here, and we didn't do that. So basically, they're going to say, okay, so Shmuel Amar ki Rabbanan, right? So why don't we say Shmuel says like Rabbanan, or Rabbi Yochanan holds like Rabbi Akiva? Rabbi Yochanan allows bitul reshut, like Rabbi Akiva said. And again, Rabbi Akiva never said this. We just said that Rabbi Akiva said it. Right? We were trying to understand. So now they say no. Amar l'cha Shmuel. Shmuel could say, Ana de Amri afilu Rabbi Akiva. I even hold like Rabbi Akiva. Okay, that here. Okay, so let's see. Shmuel holds ein bitul reshut mechatzer lechatzer. So now we're going to say, maybe he holds like Rabbi Akiva that you could do bitul reshut here. Why? Ad kan lo ka'amar Rabbi Akiva hacha ela b'shtei chatzerot zo lifnei mizo da'ascha nahadade. Remember why Shmuel didn't allow bitul reshut? Because when was the case? The case was we have courtyards next to each other, but they each open up into the mavoi. They don't forbid each other. So he says you can't do bitul reshut because each can carry in their own courtyard. We don't need that as a solution between courtyards. But in this case, you do, because this is one courtyard, one within the other, and because of that, one forbids the other, and then we allow bitul reshut because otherwise we have no choice. So, aval hata mika asra nahadade, but in the case of chatzerot next to each other, nobody forbids anyone else, and that's why bitul reshut. It's almost like saying, we talked about this before, relinquishing the rights when you have no other choice. Here you have a choice, so you can't carry between courtyards, but you can at least carry in your own courtyard, and you can carry in your own courtyard. In this case, they forbid each other, so because of that, we'll allow relinquishing of rights. For Rabbi Yochanan Amar, he would say, there I allow it, but here I wouldn't. Why? Or maybe I would, but I still would say litikune shidarti, right? I shitaftecha, I invited you to help me, not to mess me up, even though bitul reshut is an option. So how? Rabbi Yochanan says, Ana da'amre afilu leRabbanan. Ad kan lo ka'amre Rabbanan hacha ela da'amre la. What's happening here? Why can you say, I'm shutting the door and leaving you out because you're just messing me up, when theoretically they could do bitul reshut? Because in the meantime, you haven't relinquished your rights. So at this point, I'm forbidden. So it doesn't matter that maybe in the future you can. The fact that there's a potential to do it, you haven't yet. So because of that, I can shut the door. But when we're talking about the other cases, right, no one's forbidden to, there's no problem, issue, right? It's not relevant. Moving on in the Mishnah, if individuals live there. So if there were two people, one in the inner, one in the outer, we said they wouldn't forbid each other. But what if, Amar Rav Yosef, Tani Rebbe taught the following Braita. Hayush Shlosha Asurim. If there were three, they would be forbidden. Meaning if there were, right, now question is what? Let's say one in the inner and two in the outer, the one in the inner would forbid it, even though the one in the inner is permitted. So the first reaction to him is, Amar Lahu Rabibi, Lo Titzitule. Don't listen to him. Why? Now it's interesting. He's not going to disagree with his content. He's going to disagree with who he quoted it and whose name. It shows you how important it is to quote things in the proper name. I'm the one who taught him this halacha, and I said in the name of Rav Bar Ava. He got the name wrong. And what's the reason? Because ani korei bahem rabim bachitzona. What does he say? What's the issue here? The issue is that an outsider sees an outer courtyard and inner courtyard. What does he see? He sees that two people are living in the outer courtyard. Because there's an inner courtyard, nobody really goes through the outer to get to the inner. They have no idea how many people are living in the inner courtyard. If they see two in the outer, they'll probably assume there's two in the inner, and they'll think when there's no Eruv, we basically are allowed. And that's a problem. So therefore, when there's one in the inner, we're not going to allow anyone to carry because of Marit Ayin, basically, what it's going to look like. But his point is, right, I said in the name of Rav Bar Ava. And in fact, Shuli Mishkin wrote about a whole piece this week on our site about Rav Yosef and how he forgot his Torah when he got older and a whole bunch of different interesting things about Rav Yosef. What's the most interesting, it only hit me when I read her article. That's why it's good to see these things, even though I knew this, but you have to piece the things together. Rav Yosef was known to be a Sinai. He was famous for that. It was the whole thing between him and Rabbi, who was going to be the Rosh Yeshiva. And he was known to be a Sinai. He had tons of information, which is amazing to think when he lost his ability to remember everything, right? He had a photogenic memory. He knew everything. And then it's all the more sad that he forgot his Torah later in life. So Amar Rav Yosef, Mari da Avraham, says, oh, I swear in the name of Avraham. It's like a way of saying, I swear, Rabim berebi ichlifle. I see where I made my mistake. You said the words, Ho'il vani korei bahem rabim bachitzona. And I remembered it because his memory was a little bit off as saying Rebbe instead of Rabim. I see where I went wrong. Okay, this is what threw me off. Ushmuel Amar, that's just an aside about their debate. Shmuel disagrees with this halacha. Shmuel Amar la'olam mutarot ad shiyu shnayim b'pnimit ve'echad b'chitzona. It's only a problem when there's two in the inside. Then it's a problem and one on the outside. In other words, three could be two different combinations of three, one in the inner, two in the outer, or two in the inner, one in the outer. He says, I only think it's a problem when there's two in the inner and they didn't make an eruv. Amar Rabbi Elazar, v'nochri hareu kirabim. What if there's a nochri in the inside and only one nochri? He's considered like two people and he's going to forbid. So they say, why are you making a distinction? What's the reason? Either Teman de yada yada, uman de lo, and that's either everyone knows there's only one, and that's why Shmuel thinks it's okay. And man de lo yada, and anyone who doesn't know, sever eruv erev. The fact that there's two people, he doesn't know also did the inner people make an eruv, so we can assume maybe the people made an eruv. So you could say the same logic for a nochri. Nochri nami, a Gentile, amrinan de yada yada. Either he's living with someone, right? Everyone will know that he's living by himself, and that's why it's okay. And de lo yada, and anyone who doesn't know, savar a yure oger, will assume that one rented the space from the nochri. So what do they answer? No, because stam nochri ikar de ogar mifapai. If people rented the space from him and resolved it that way, like the Eruv and the Jew, right? Then everyone would know about it. That's the kind of thing we say that has a kala. Everybody knows it's like a call, a voice. Word gets around about that very quickly when someone rents something from a non-Jew. Why that would be, I don't know, but maybe the Gentile talks about it, talks it up. It becomes public. Because it becomes public, therefore, there's no way people wouldn't know about it. And that's why in this case, it isn't the case. So anyone who doesn't know that it's one person and doesn't know, right, he won't know that they rented because they didn't rent. Nobody would know. Therefore, we're going to assume that we want to basically say it's no good. Last thing for today, Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, and there's a picture. Let's just pull up the picture for a second. What if you have 10 houses? Okay, Asara Batim. Now we're moving on to something else. Zeh lifni mizeh. Okay, and this is really going to lead into tomorrow's daf. You have 10 houses, each in the other. So to get to the courtyard, you have to pass through all the houses. That means that each of these houses, except for the last one, functions both as an entranceway into the next house, which we learned that an entranceway at Beit Sha'ar, you don't have to do an Eruv in. You actually can't put the Eruv there either, and they don't have to join the Eruv. And only the inner one is really not functioning as both. So each of these houses functions both as a house and as an entranceway. So what's the halacha? Pnimi notenet eruvo v'dayo. The inner one does an Eruv, and that's it. And that basically permits everything because all the others are just entranceways to get to the 10th house. For Rabbi Yochanan Amar afilu chitzon, even the first house. So the Gemara questions, chitzon beit sharu, but the first one is 100% an entranceway to all the others. How could you possibly say it needs an eruv? So the answer, chitzon shel pnimi. What he meant is the 9th, the inner of the outer. Okay, the chitzon, the outer of the inner one. So the 9th. So now they say, b'mai kamifliya. So what's the machloket? Do you put it in 9 and 10, or do you just put it in 10? What's their debate? So mar savar beit sha'ar diachid shmei beit sha'ar, umar savar lo shmei beit sha'ar. One holds that even if it's just the 9th is only an entranceway to a 10, that's not enough to take something that really is a house and turn it into an entranceway. But if, right, the other opinion says no, you need it to be an entranceway into 2 houses. So basically, if you say only the pnimi needs, then you basically say the 9th is considered Beit Sha'ar, even though it only opens up into 1 house. According to the other opinion, in order for it to switch from a house to a Beit Sha'ar, it has to open up into 2 houses. So therefore, number 8 already will be a Beit Sha'ar, and all the others. But 9, since it only opens into 1, and it also functions as a house, we're going to treat it as a house and not a Beit Sha'ar. Okay, we're going to stop here for today. And pick up from the bottom of this daf on tomorrow's daf, which will be up in a little while after today's class. Have a Shabbat Shalom, everybody.